Truistery Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot. Today, Truistery Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. Sunlight crept through the pale yellow curtains of the Carter family kitchen, painting broad, golden stripes across the worn oak table. At precisely 6:30 a.m., Linda Carter slipped quietly onto the edge of a wooden stool, her bare feet brushing the cool hardwood floor. In her hands, she cradled a simple white mug filled with freshly brewed Arabica coffee, its rich aroma mingling with the tangy sweetness of melted butter on sourdough toast. This small ritual was the heart of her mornings in Maplewood, Ohio, where time seemed to slow for just a few moments before the day's demands rushed in. She placed the mug carefully on a matching saucer, then lifted the lid off a small glass jar of blackberry jam. The deep purple hue gleamed under the kitchen light as she spread a layer of jam over one slice of toast, then slid it onto a rectangular plate alongside a fluffy scrambled egg, bright with flecks of chive. On the counter, a vase held a single sunflower, Michael's favorite, from last weekend's farmer's market. Its golden petals opened toward the window. A quiet nod to summer's ease. A soft creak from the hallway signaled that Emma was stirring. Linda wiped her hands on a flour-dusted dish towel, tucking a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Breakfast is ready, sweet pea," she called gently. Emma's barefoot pitter-patter grew louder as the 8-year-old rounded the corner in her favorite unicorn pajamas, hair still tousled from sleep. Her eyes widened at the plate, and she let out a delighted before stuffing a forkful of scrambled egg into her mouth. Across the table, Linda's phone buzzed with a quiet chime, an alert for Michael's early departure. She glanced at it, noting his flight departure time from Columbus was set for 8 a.m. Normally, he would have been home to eat with them, but his new role at the Minneapolis branch meant more frequent trips. She tapped the reminder away, offering a reassuring smile to Emma. "Dad's got a big project kicking off today, honey. He sends his love." Emma nodded, swiping another bite of toast. Between chews, she asked wide-eyed, "Will he be home for my school play next week?" Linda ruffled her daughter's hair, careful not to smudge the butter. "He promised he'd be there, pumpkin. We'll make sure Dad sees you shine on that stage." There was comfort in that promise, but a gentle tug at Linda's heart reminded her how quickly plans could change. She took a slow sip of her coffee, savoring its warmth and depth of flavor. Each morning was a gift, a chance to gather strength before the day spilled open with meetings, school runs, and never-ending to-do lists. By 7 a.m., the kitchen was bustling with soft clinks and clatters. Linda filled a stainless steel thermos with the remaining coffee, sealing in the steam and aroma. She neatly folded Emma's mismatched socks, one pink with polka dots, one striped in rainbow colors, then stuffed them into a small canvas backpack, already weighted with textbooks and art supplies. Just as she secured the zipper, the front door clicked open. Michael stepped in, suit jacket draped over his arm, shoes tapping against the tile. His dark hair was impeccably groomed, and even at this early hour, he carried an air of quiet confidence. He leaned down, planting a gentle kiss on Emma's damp forehead. "Good morning, my sunshine," he murmured. Emma giggled and burrowed into his embrace, crumbs of toast clinging to her unicorn pajamas. Linda stood, smoothing the hem of her favorite chambray shirt. "Coffee," she offered, lifting the thermos. Michael nodded, accepting the cup with a grateful smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He took a slow, appreciative sip, murmuring, "Perfect as always." They shared a brief moment, three hearts bound by routine and ritual. For Linda, these mornings were a lifeline, reminders of what mattered most. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a flicker of unease had begun to stir. The subtle tension of Michael's hurried schedule, the faint scent on his shirt that she couldn't quite place, it hummed at the edge of her awareness. But she pushed it away, focusing instead on the gentle clatter of dishes and Emma's cheerful chatter about cupcakes and school projects. Finished with breakfast, Michael glanced at his watch. "I've got to run," he said, planting a quick kiss on Linda's cheek. "Big presentation in Minneapolis tomorrow. I'll call you on the flight." Linda nodded, mustering a bright smile. "Safe travels, honey. We'll miss you." He gathered his briefcase and with a final wave to Emma, who mimed a trumpet fanfare, he hurried out the door. The front door clicked shut and, for a moment, the kitchen fell into a hush punctuated only by the hum of the refrigerator. Excuse me, Linda," let out a soft breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned to Emma, swept her into a warm hug, and whispered, "Let's make today wonderful, okay?" Emma giggled, patting her mother's cheek. "Let's, Mommy." And as the late spring sun climbed higher over Maplewood, there in their cozy kitchen, Linda treasured the serene beauty of that moment, unaware of the cracks beginning to form beneath her picture-perfect morning. After Michael slipped out the front door, briefcase in hand, and Emma returned to her unicorn print backpack, Linda lingered in the quiet kitchen. The sunflower in its vase still faced the window. Petals slightly drooped, a subtle echo of her own mood. She rinsed Michael's coffee mug as if performing a ritual of cleansing, but the faint fragrance of his cologne, something crisp and, she realized, oddly floral, lingered in the ceramic rim. Over the next few days, that scent became impossible to ignore. Every morning when Michael kissed Emma goodbye, those same delicate notes drifted onto Linda's sleeve. She tried rationalizing it. Perhaps the housekeeping staff at his hotel used a new brand. Yet deep down, a small knot of unease coiled tighter each time she caught it. At work, an interior design firm downtown, Linda found her thoughts wandering. During a presentation about custom cabinetry, she stared at the grain patterns in her clients' wood samples and pictured Michael standing with Alice, laughing in Cape Harbor. The ticking of the conference room clock sounded too loud. When her colleague, Jenna, nudged her mid-slide, Linda jumped, rattling her pointer. "Everything okay?" Jenna asked, eyebrows raised. "Yeah," Linda replied, clearing her throat. She forced a smile. "Just off today." Back at home that evening, she tucked Emma into bed and read Goodnight Moon in a soft voice, stifling her worry beneath the gentle monotony of rhyme. As Emma's eyelids fluttered closed, she whispered, "I love you, pumpkin," and kissed a forehead still warm from play. But once Emma drifted into sleep, Linda tiptoed into the living room and sank onto the edge of the sofa. The house felt unnaturally quiet without Michael's brief goodnight, as though a vital chord had gone missing from her day. She poured herself a glass of water and checked her phone. There were messages from Michael, a flight itinerary, a reminder to sign Emma's field trip permission slip. 3 heart emojis strung together, but nothing unexpected. Still, every notification felt like a small jolt of dread. That weekend, Linda invited her friend Sophie over, hoping for a distraction. Sophie arrived with muffins and a sympathetic smile. They sat at the kitchen island, the morning sun spilling onto quartz countertops. "So, how's everything?" Sophie asked between bites of blueberry streusel. "Busy," Linda began, stirring her coffee. "Michael's schedule is insane. He's in Chicago this week, then Dallas, then back to Minneapolis."
She paused.
"And I'm noticing things. Small things. Like his shirts smelling different, or him sending me cryptic texts at weird hours." Sophie's eyes softened. "Have you asked him about it?" "I've tried," Linda said, voice catching. "He says it's work, gifts from clients, hotel stuff," but she trailed off, tapping her finger on the counter. "I don't know. My gut's telling me something's off." Sophie reached across and squeezed her hand. "Trust your instincts. But give him the chance to explain. Then you'll know what you need to do." Linda nodded, grateful for Sophie's calm. Yet even as she agreed, another part of her bristled. What if Sophie was wrong? What if her instincts were simply influenced by loneliness and anxiety? Later that afternoon, Linda decided to check Michael's suitcase. She justified it as verifying the hotel's mystery lotion rather than invading his privacy. standing in her bedroom. She lifted the lid of his small carry-on. Inside, neatly folded shirts sat atop a handful of hotel-issued travel kits. She rifled through the kits. Lotion, toothpaste, tiny shampoo bottles, none with the flowery scent. As she rummaged deeper, her hand brushed against something unfamiliar, a slender travel-size bottle of body mist labeled Jardin Secret. A high-end French fragrance she had never seen before. A quick sniff confirmed what she already feared. This was the scent that clung to Michael's collars. A fragrance far too feminine to be an accidental loner. Her pulse quickened. She held the bottle under her nose, smelling it like evidence. The mist smelled of jasmine and rose petals on a light breeze, an aroma that belonged in a boutique, not an executive's luggage. She stuffed the bottle into her robe pocket and closed the suitcase as quietly as she could. Eyes stinging, she sank onto the bed. Doubt had grown into conviction. Something was very wrong. That evening, she prepared a dinner of roasted salmon and asparagus, insisting Emma help garnish the plates. Emma chattered on about her day at school, cupcakes for fundraiser, and a new friendship with a boy in her class. Linda forced smiles and laughter, but her heart thudded in her chest. Each time she heard the front door click, she rose to greet him, hoping for normalcy, but braced herself for the familiar, unwelcome scent. When Michael finally arrived, he strode through the hallway in a crisp navy suit, briefcase in hand. "Dinner's ready," Linda called, voice steady. He kissed her cheek, and she inhaled sharply. There it was again, that floral note mingled with his cologne. She dropped her gaze to the plate she was carrying, feeling a swell of emotion she could not mask. They ate in near silence, save for Emma's animated recital of her day. Linda watched Michael's face for clues. A flicker of guilt? Exhaustion? He seemed distant, as though part of him still lingered in some distant hotel room. After dinner, Emma was tucked back into bed, and Michael retreated to his home office to wrap up emails. Linda hovered nearby, heart in her throat. "Michael," she began softly. He looked up. There's something I found in your suitcase." She reached into her robe, withdrew the bottle of Jardin Secret, and set it on his desk. "Can you explain this?" Michael's face went from surprise to defensiveness in a heartbeat. "That's just hotel lotion," he said, but his voice cracked. "It's new. They gave it to me as a gift." He reached for the bottle, but Linda shook her head. "It's not lotion, Michael. This is a perfume." She fought to keep her voice calm. "I need you to be honest with me." A tense beat of silence followed. Then he sighed, sank back in his chair, and ran a hand through his hair. "Linda, that's not from a client," he admitted, gaze downcast. I've been seeing someone." The words, when they came, felt like concrete dropped onto her chest. Her throat tightened, tears pricked her eyes. "Why?" she managed, voice barely above a whisper. He closed his eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "It started months ago. I ran into Alice in Chicago. She was going through a hard time and he broke off." "You were going through a hard time, too," Linda said, voice trembling. "And now I'm supposed to believe that's an excuse?" Michael's silence was all the answer she needed. The betrayal cut deeper than she'd imagined. That night, as she lay awake in the darkness, the bed beside her cold and empty, Linda realized nothing would ever feel the same. In the days that followed, the garden outside their Maplewood home lost its luster to Linda's eyes. The hummingbirds that once darted between bird feeders no longer distracted her from her sorrow. Emma sensed her mother's distance. She would climb into Linda's lap, asking for bedtime stories, but find only a hollow gaze. At work, Linda drifted through color palettes and floor plans while her mind replayed Michael's admission on a loop. The once comforting routine of client meetings began to feel like mechanical motions. Her hands would hover over swatches of fabric, but her heart lay tangled in doubt. One Saturday morning, Sophie stopped by again, concern etched on her face. She found Linda at the kitchen table, the Jardin Secret bottle placed between them like a glaring accusation. "I told you to trust your gut," Sophie said softly. But you don't have to go through this alone. Linda nodded, grateful for the steadfast friendship. I'm trying to figure out what my next step is. For Emma, for me. Sophie reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You will. I believe in you. As Linda watched Sophie leave, she took a deep breath. The shadows of doubt had settled over her life, but somewhere beneath them, a spark of resolve began to glow. She would find her way through this, one step at a time, and discover who she was beyond the scent of betrayal and the weight of broken promises. And in that quiet, maple-scented morning light, Linda Carter knew her world had irrevocably changed. Yet still, she chose to stand firm, determined to face whatever came next with courage and grace. Michael Carter stood in line at the Newark Airport TSA checkpoint, his tailored navy blazer snug against his broad shoulders. He tapped his foot as the security officer scanned IDs and boarding passes under the harsh fluorescent lights. Beside him lay a carry-on rolling suitcase, its wheels squeaking faintly when he shifted his weight. Normally, he would have been glad to leave Maplewood and the tension brewing at home for a week on the road. But today, his heart pounded for very different reasons. Alice Monroe, his college friend and former roommate, texted him an ETA. Got through security. Heading to Gate B12. See you soon. He exhaled, brushing imaginary lint from his jacket. His palms were damp. He wiped them discreetly on his slacks. This wasn't how he'd imagined his career trajectory. Leading strategy sessions by day and sneaking off for stolen weekends by night. Yet here he was, between duty and desire. When Michael reached the glass barriers, he swiped his boarding pass. The agent nodded, and he stepped into the concourse. Gate B12 was down a long hall lined with snack bars and duty-free shops. He passed newsstands advertising tabloids with headlines about celebrity breakups, ironic fuel for his own crumbling marriage back home. Moments later, Alice appeared. She was unmistakable. Soft waves of dark hair, a tailored cream trench coat, and a smile that still made him catch his breath. She moved toward him with an ease that reminded him of college dorm days, when they'd stay up late on the common room couch, debating everything from politics to their favorite 80s bands. Hey, he said, voice hushed. He offered her a gentle hug. Hey yourself, she replied, slipping an arm around his waist. Her perfume bloomed, a subtle blend of vanilla and sandalwood, nothing like the floral flight mist he'd found in his suitcase, yet intoxicating in its own right. They boarded the regional jet side by side. The cabin smelled faintly of recycled air and stale pretzels. Michael helped Alice lift her carry-on into the overhead bin. She shot him a grateful glance that made his chest tighten. Once seated, they avoided the small-talk chatter typical of business travelers. Instead, they spoke in low tones about their shared past, her recent move back from London to launch a nonprofit, his latest corporate promotion. Every so often, they would brush hands, and the brief electric jolt sent a thrill through him that was both reckless and comforting. Delta 237 to Portland is boarding now, the gate agent announced. Portland, Maine, not Minneapolis, not Chicago. This was the first real lie Michael had told Linda. He checked his reflection in the tiny window, straightened his tie, and forced a confident nod. The flight was short and smooth, about an hour. They passed the time reviewing slides on his laptop, ostensibly tweaking the Minneapolis presentation he would deliver Monday morning. But his eyes kept drifting to Alice. The way her forehead creased when she read the text, the curve of her lips when she whispered a suggestion for a slide rewrite. They landed just before sunset. The gradient sky, pink melding into peach, then deep indigo, stretched over rolling hills dotted with pines. The plane taxied to a small regional terminal where the jet bridge connected directly to the tarmac. Michael and Alice stepped onto the warm asphalt, drawing a few curious looks from other passengers. But their shared excitement made them impervious to prying eyes. A silver SUV, hired by Alice, waited in the small parking lot. Michael and Alice climbed in, and the driver, polite but silent, ferried them along winding two-lane roads toward Cape Harbor, a secluded seaside resort town about an hour north. Shoreline cabins peeked through tall firs. and wooden signs marked organic farms and blueberry stands. As they drove deeper into the pines, each mile peeled away Michael's anxieties. The relentless buzz of corporate life, the creaking doubts at home, they felt miles away under that vast Maine sky. Alice reached across and placed her hand on his. "I'm so glad you're here," she said softly. Her thumb traced small circles on his palm. The gesture was innocent, almost maternal, yet it ignited a longing he hadn't felt in years. They arrived at Seaglass Cove Resort, a cluster of cedar-shingled cottages perched on a rocky cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Salt spray drifted through open windows, carrying the distant cries of gulls. The receptionist handed them matching key cards for Cabin 7. "Enjoy your stay," she said, voice clipped, clearly accustomed to well-heeled business travelers. Cabin 7 was cozy, reclaimed wood floors, a stone fireplace, and a sliding glass door that opened onto a small deck overlooking the sea. Michael ran his hand over the rough-hewn mantel as Alice set down her bags, unpacking a lightweight tote of sundresses. "Want to grab a drink on the deck?" Alice asked. She already had 2 chilled local beers waiting in her bag, labels bearing a hand-drawn lobster. Michael poured. They clinked bottles, the amber liquid catching the last rays of sunlight. The ocean crashed below, relentless and eternal, a perfect backdrop for something fleeting and forbidden. They talked about trivialities, her new nonprofit's fundraising gala, his newest promotion. Gradually, conversation gave way to comfortable silence. Michael watched the horizon, felt Alice's warmth in the thinning space between them. "Remember our senior trip to Cape Cod?" she asked suddenly. He turned to find her smiling. "We got rained out the whole time, but we still managed to sneak into the old lighthouse." He laughed. "You still have that pirate hat you bought at that cheesy gift shop?" Alice grinned, leaning in so their foreheads nearly touched. "You kept it all these years." He nodded, swallowing hard. "There are things I've kept, too," he said quietly. Her breath hitched. Before he could second-guess himself, he brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as though he were testing whether it was real. Then it deepened, urgent, and electric. The sea wind rushed in, carrying their stolen promise across the waves. They retreated to the cabin's living room, the fire crackling to life. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. Inside, their stolen weekend began in earnest, an unhurried dinner of locally caught cod and scallops, wine by the fireplace, and the silent confession of shared longing. Late that night, they lay together under soft duvets. The moonlight seeped through the window, illuminating Alice's profile. Michael traced the curve of her cheek with his fingertips. "I know this is wrong," he whispered. Her fingers tightened around his. "It's the only right thing I've felt in a long time," she replied. And for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Their 2 days unfolded in a blur of passion and quiet intimacy, morning walks along rocky tide pools, afternoon naps on the deck, while gulls circled overhead. Candlelit dinners in the resort's rustic dining room. They found nooks in the cabin where they whispered secrets, laughter rippling as they teased each other about their college exploits. Yet beneath the bliss lurked the weight of reality. Each time Michael checked his phone, the time zone jumped between Eastern and Central. Each night, he set a silent alarm to wake before Linda's midnight texts, messages she sent after tucking Emma in, reminders of homework, a good night, love you. He ignored them, pretending to sleep, until the soft glow of morning convinced him they were forgotten. On their final night, Alice pressed a handwritten note into his palm. "For when you doubt it was real," she said. Inside, her neat script read, "I remember us. I remember you. Always." Michael tucked it into his wallet, heart constricting with both gratitude and guilt. They returned to the terminal with hollow smiles, carrying their carry-on suitcases once more. The driver dropped them at Gate B14 for the red-eye to Minneapolis. Michael held Alice's hand until the last possible moment, their fingers entwined in a silent steadying of nerves. She pressed a kiss to his cheek, her eyes shimmering with tears. Be safe, she whispered. Always, he replied, though he knew it was a promise he might break. After she boarded, he watched her until the door closed, then turned and stepped onto the jetway. Inside the cabin, his seatmate was already dozing. Michael slipped into his seat, heart pounding like a hunter's drum. As the plane took off, he peered out the window at the darkened coastline fading behind him, a silver sliver of moon guiding his way north. He stared at the note from Alice in his coat pocket. His knuckles were white around the boarding pass. The rhythmic drone of the engines lulled some tension, but not all. In the dim cabin light, Michael realized that by morning he would be 1,000 miles and a world of secrets away from Maplewood, Ohio. He closed his eyes, listening to the hum, and tried to summon the detachment he needed, corporate strategy by day, hidden passion by night. But a part of him knew that once he landed, he would never be the same man who kissed Linda's cheek that morning. The next chapter of his life had begun, written in ink of longing and betrayal, and there was no turning back. When Flight 482 from Minneapolis landed at Newark at 6:15 a.m., Michael Carter stepped off the plane into the crisp pre-dawn air, heart thudding in his chest. He pressed his phone against his ear. "Hey," he whispered into the handset. No answer. He glanced at the screen. 2 missed calls, 4 text messages, all from Linda. His throat tightened. He slipped the phone into his pocket and steeled himself for what lay ahead. He hailed a taxi and settled into the back seat, watching streetlights flicker past. The drive from the airport to Maplewood took nearly 40 minutes, each one stretching longer than the last. He rehearsed explanations in his head, a client gift, an innocent reunion, a misunderstanding. None felt convincing. He arrived to find the front porch light blazing in the damp dawn. He climbed the steps carefully and used his keycard to enter. The house smelled faintly of vanilla and freshly washed sheets. Linda had a new scented laundry detergent. He paused in the foyer, taking in the silent hallway. It was too quiet for such an early hour. He padded down the hallway toward the kitchen and nearly startled when Linda stepped out of the pantry door, arms folded, expression unreadable. "You're home early," she said, voice measured. "My flight was canceled," he lied reflexively. "I managed to catch an earlier one." She said nothing, but the set of her jaw spoke volumes. Michael's hand itched for his coffee mug, but instead he found himself planted before her. "We need to talk," Linda said. She held out her hand, palm up. In it lay the slender bottle of Jardine's secret body mist, the very fragrance he'd told her was just hotel lotion. "That's not hotel lotion," she stated, eyes unwavering. Michael closed his eyes, jaw clenched. "I told you." "Don't," she interrupted sharply. "I don't want more excuses." She dropped the bottle on the kitchen island with deliberate force. It skidded across the granite surface and rattled against the backsplash. Michael watched the curve of the amber glass sky up at him, the label bold and mocking, Jardine's Secret by Maison Fleur. "Linda, that isn't." "Don't." Her voice cracked, and she exhaled a trembling breath. "Just don't." He opened his mouth and closed it. The silence between them pulsed with every unspoken word of betrayal, regret, and guilt. Under the fluorescent kitchen lights, he felt exposed, stripped of defenses. "And this?" Linda reached into her robe pocket and produced her phone, screen illuminated with a paused video frame. It showed Michael's face, eyes half-lidded in pleasure. As a hand, not Linda's, caressed his cheek, he recognized the floral perfume on Alice's wrist, the dark curls framing her face. "How long?" Linda's voice dropped to a whisper so fierce it cut the hush. "How long have you been doing this?" Michael's gaze dropped to the floor, where a stray M&M dropped from Emma's breakfast bowl lay crushed beneath his shoe. "No," Linda said, one step forward. "Don't you dare start with an apology." Her violet eyes glinted. He'd always admired that color, but now they looked like cold amethysts, beautiful yet implacable. He flinched at her disappointment, more painful than anger. "It's been," he began, voice low, "almost a year." Linda's breath left her in a gust. She wrapped her arms around herself, swaying as though bracing against a storm. The manic hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of a fridge timer were the only sounds. "A year," she echoed, voice hollow. "A year you decided I wasn't enough." He swallowed, eyes stinging. "Linda, I'm so sorry. It just happened. Alice reached out when her mother died, and—" "Stop right there." Her tone was blunt, each word sharp enough to leave a cut. "You crossed a line the moment you lied to me, the moment you replaced your wedding ring with another woman's perfume." Michael closed his eyes, flicked his gaze toward the window overlooking the lilac bushes, still in full bloom. It should have been a comforting sight, a symbol of renewal, but all he felt was ash. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, voice cracking. "We got caught up in old memories. It wasn't planned." "It was a choice," Linda said. "All those nights away, the business dinners, the trips to Chicago and Minneapolis, those were choices." She grabbed her phone and unlocked the video. Instead of closing the app, she pressed play. The living room television flickered on, casting dim light across the tile floor. On screen, Michael and Alice were seated at a small bar table, hands intertwined. Their laughter was muted but recognizable. Once it ended, Alice reached across the table, fingering the collar of Michael's shirt. He leaned in and kissed her. Linda watched the recording, every second searing into her mind. She clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles turned white. "That's us," she said wearily. "Only we started our marriages that way, holding hands, laughing, believing in forever." Michael's eyes brimmed with tears. "Linda, please." "No, Michael," she said, voice breaking. "I don't want to hear it. You cheated, you lied, and now we're standing in line for divorce." He looked stricken, reaching out. But Linda held up a hand, replaced the pause on the remote, and turned off the television. The screen plunged them into a damp darkness. She backed away, leaning against the counter. "I want you to go," she whispered. "Leave. I don't want to see you in this house ever again." He nodded, tears spilling onto his cheeks. Without a word, he turned and left the kitchen. The front door clicked, then thudded closed. Linda sank to the floor, phone still in hand, video still paused. She pressed it to her chest, body shaking in grief. The next morning, Emma bounded into the kitchen, backpack in tow, singing a made-up tune about kittens. Linda looked up with red-rimmed eyes and forced a smile. She slipped Emma's scarf around her neck and pressed a kiss to her daughter's damp forehead. "Mommy," Emma said softly. "Are you okay?" Linda's throat clenched. "I'm fine, sweet pea," she murmured, smoothing Emma's hair. "Just a little tired." They ate breakfast in a fragile quiet. Emma chattered about her classmates' new kittens, oblivious to the fracture in her family. Linda nodded absently, her mind still on the video, the perfume bottle, and Michael's silent departure. At the bus stop, Emma ran off to line up with friends. Linda watched her go, heart-wrenching. She straightened her shoulders, inhaled the early winter air, and promised herself she would rebuild. She would find joy again, for Emma's sake and her own. Over the coming days, Linda filled the empty space Michael left behind. She changed the sheets, washed his shirts, each one a tiny reminder of his betrayal, then stored them in a box beneath the bed. She switched out his cologne for her own soothing lavender oil, determined to reclaim her senses. Emma's laughter returned to the house in glimpses, giggles over pillow forts, bedtime stories of brave forest kittens, holiday decorations strewn across the mantel. Professionally, Linda channeled her pain into ambition. She tackled a high-profile client who wanted a complete redesign of a Victorian townhouse. Late nights drafting floor plans, selecting fabrics, and sourcing reclaimed hardwood floors became both an escape and a mission. The firm's partners praised her creativity and attention to detail, and she found herself invigorated by new challenges. When Linda's mother, Margaret, visited from Cleveland, she found her daughter composed, almost serene. Over coffee in the sunny breakfast nook, Margaret reached across the table. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. Linda traced the rim of her mug. "I'm okay, Mom," she said. "It hurts, still does. But I'm realizing life doesn't end when someone betrays you." I have Emma, this house, my work. I have reasons to keep going. Margaret smiled, pride shining in her eyes. You're stronger than you know. A month after the video's revelation, Michael called from Minneapolis. Linda, can we talk? He asked, voice trembling. She let the phone ring 3 times before picking up.
I'm sorry, Michael.
We have nothing left to say. He hesitated. I understand.
I'm sorry.
Goodbye, Michael, she replied and hung up. The line clicked dead, but Linda felt a profound calm where anguish had once roared. She placed the phone on the table, rose, and drew a deep breath. In her mind's eye, she pictured the lilacs in the front yard, their petals falling in a gentle cascade. She would replant them this spring, vibrant, resilient, ready to bloom again. Emma's voice echoed behind her as she steered toward the living room. Mom, read me another story? Linda smiled, a true, wholehearted smile. Of course, my love. In that moment, the shadows of betrayal receded, and she realized this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one she would write on her own terms. The morning after Michael's last call, Linda Carter awoke to quiet. No hum of his briefcase wheels in the hallway, no soft click of his bedroom door. The house felt too still, too empty, yet strangely peaceful. She lay in bed a moment longer, listening to Emma's gentle breathing beside her, and realized this was her chance to start over. She slipped out of bed, pulling on a soft gray cardigan and comfortable jeans. The first task on her mental checklist was simple: reclaim her space. In the master bedroom, she opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed and removed the cardboard box labeled Michael's things. Her chest tightened as she carried it down the hallway, but she welcomed the rush of resolve that followed. In the guest bedroom closet, she tucked the box onto the top shelf, out of sight and out of mind. Back in her own bathroom, Linda smiled at her reflection. No more dimples when she forced a polite grin, no more weariness settling beneath her eyes. She splashed cool water on her face, then massaged lavender-scented moisturizer into her skin. This ritual wasn't about vanity, but reclaiming her sense of self. She chose a bright coral lipstick, a color she'd abandoned when pregnancy and long nights had dulled her routines. Today, she would wear it as a banner of her own renewal. Downstairs, Emma emerged, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Morning, Mommy, she mumbled. Linda scooped her into a hug, breath smelling of teddy bear toothpaste and last night's rain. Good morning, sweet pea, Linda replied, kissing Emma's forehead. Today's special. Over oatmeal and fresh apples, Linda shared her plan. I'm signing up for a weekend pottery class, she announced. Remember how you said you wanted to learn how to make flower pots? You and I can go together. Emma's eyes lit up. Can I pick the flowers too? Of course, Linda said, heartwarming. After breakfast, Linda carried mugs and bowls to the sink and set the dishwasher running. She paused, hearing the gentle thrum of water spraying. For years, the dishwasher noise had served as a backdrop to conversations, happy or tense, but now it felt soothing, a reminder that life's small routines persisted. She walked to her home office, her sanctuary on days she needed to focus. Light streamed through the window over her desk, illuminating half-finished sketches of interior layouts pinned to a corkboard. A new project awaited her attention, a local family renovating their mid-century ranch home. She reviewed her notes, typed a brief email to the clients confirming next week's site visit, and felt her confidence grow with each keystroke. Late that afternoon, she loaded Emma into the car and drove to the community center where the pottery studio was located. The building smelled of clay dust and kiln heat. Rows of wheel stations lined the sunlit workshop, each accompanied by a wooden bat and a spinning wheel. In the corner, shelves held bisque-fired bowls, mugs, and vases painted in every imaginable color. Their instructor, Maya, a soft-spoken woman with paint-stained hands, greeted them. Welcome to Clay and Light, she said, guiding them to a pair of wheels side by side. First step, center your clay. Trust the wheel and trust your own strength. Linda wadded a lump of chocolate brown clay into a ball and placed it on the wheelhead. She cupped her hands around it, took a deep breath, and pressed. The wheel spun. The clay wobbled. She steadied it with gentle, firm pressure, whispering to herself, "You've got this." The clay hummed beneath her palms, collapsing at first, then rising into a smooth cylinder. Emma watched wide-eyed, small fingers stained with flower-white clay as she tried her own. For 2 hours, Linda and Emma shaped lumps of earth into imperfect but earnest bowls. Linda felt a thrill with each successful pull of clay. Emma squealed when her pot held water for the first time. They chatted about school projects and weekend plans, echoes of normalcy Linda had feared lost. By the time they cleaned up, the sun had dipped low. Linda carried 2 wrapped greenware pieces home, proud imperfections in her arms. She tucked them carefully on a shelf in her kitchen, an emblem of the work she and Emma had done together, and of the new life she was forging. That evening, Linda settled at her desk to draft a proposal for her interior design firm. She set a timer, 90 minutes of concentrated writing on concept boards, material samples, and a preliminary budget. The words flowed more easily than they had in months. She finished the proposal and clicked send with a sense of accomplishment that had little to do with pleasing a client and everything to do with reclaiming her professional passion. Hours later, she found herself back in the kitchen, reading bedtime stories to Emma by the warm glow of a single bedside lamp. After good night, construction site, Emma asked, "Mommy, will you make another bowl tomorrow?" Linda kissed her daughter's forehead. "Yes, honey. We'll go back on Saturday." As she tucked Emma in, Linda paused in the doorway and watched her daughter's peaceful face, her tiny chest rising and falling in steady breaths. The weight that had pressed at Linda's chest loosened, replaced by a quiet joy she hadn't felt in years. In her own bedroom, Linda paused beside the cedar chest where Michael's box remained hidden. She placed a folded stack of ceramic bowls, Emma's and hers, on top of it. The bowls were far from perfect, rims tilted, sides uneven, a few finger marks left in the clay. But they were theirs. She pressed her palm against their cool surfaces, feeling the undulating ridges. She turned out the light and slipped into bed, the soft cotton sheets welcoming her. Sleep came easily, carrying her into a world where loss no longer defined her, where every dawn held the promise of discovery, strength, and the simple pleasure of clay beneath her fingertips. And in that restful darkness, her heart brimmed with hope, of Saturday's pottery class, of clients satisfied with her designs, of late-night chats with Emma, and of a future she would build, one gentle step, one new beginning, at a time. The desert sun blazed overhead like a merciless spotlight, reflecting off the rippling sands of Kuwait in February 1991. Colonel David Grant, then only 36 years old, had endured weeks of sandstorms, heat, and relentless patrols. His uniform, once crisp, was now caked with dust, and the weight of his sidearm felt heavier with each passing mile. Yet nothing in his training had prepared him for the moment he first saw Claire Bennett. She was a civilian flight nurse with the 68th Medical Evacuation Squadron, dressed in olive drab scrubs and combat boots, hair tied back in a practical ponytail tucked beneath her cap. She moved with confident purpose, clipboard in hand, directing medevac helicopters as they landed and took off on the makeshift runway beyond the sand berms. David watched her for only a heartbeat before a sudden mortar warning flashed across his radio, yet the image of her focused profile lingered, etched into his mind. That afternoon, David's Humvee rolled up to the casual cluster of medical tents where injured soldiers were triaged before being flown home. He dismounted and greeted the flight nurse on duty, a familiar face, who waved him over. "Colonel Grant," she said as they ducked beneath a canvas flap. "They've got another batch coming in from the front." "We're full up." David nodded, scanning flurries of activity. Stretcher bearers rushing, nurses administering IVs, doctors shouting orders. He spotted Claire bending low over a wounded private, soothing the soldier's panic with a steady voice. "Let me help," David offered. He hauled a sandbag off a fuel drum, setting it under a tent pole to shore up the canvas. Claire glanced over, eyebrow raised but grateful. "Thanks, Colonel," she said, voice warm despite the desert heat. "We could use all the help we can get." In that brief exchange, something clicked. David felt the familiar rush of leadership tempered by unexpected admiration. Claire's calm strength under fire mirrored the courage he prized in his own troops. His heart had never been so certain of something so improbable, falling in love in the middle of war. Over the next week, every patrol and every shift seemed to bring them together. They shared quick conversations over ration packs, shredded beef tacos, tangy potato wedges, and the occasional piece of hardtack. Claire teased him about his earnest, military buzzword-laden briefings. He admired her ability to comfort the injured even when her own eyes flickered with exhaustion. One evening, after a particularly intense mortar barrage, David volunteered to ride in the medevac helicopter on the return leg to Kuwait City. Claire climbed into the co-pilot's seat, her eyes bright under the helmet's visor.
Colonel.
She said over the rotor's roar, "I'm glad you're coming with me. It can get lonely up here." David took a deep breath of the conditioned air, then met her gaze in the mirror. "I'd follow you anywhere," he said quietly, and the words felt honest in a way every mission order before them had not. Below them, the desert stretched endless. Claire's fingers hovered over the console controls, steady despite the churning wind and throb of the engines. She guided the helicopter back to base with practiced ease, and David watched her jaw set with determination. He realized then that she was as much a leader as any officer he knew. Her battlefield was lives, her arsenal compassion. When they landed, the base's floodlights illuminated the tarmac like fallen stars. David stood aside as patients wheeled past, pausing to place a gentle hand on a young soldier's shoulder. Then he pressed closer to Claire. "Tomorrow," she said without looking at him, "I need 2 good arms to unload stretchers. Think you can handle that?" He grinned, adrenaline still pumping. "Try to stop me." Their first real date came after the ceasefire. The base organized a small celebration under canvas tents. String lights hung on makeshift poles, the red and white plastic glow of MRE heaters replaced by the amber flicker of lanterns. David found Claire leaning against a water barrel, tucking stray hairs back into her cap. He held out his hand. "Dance with me?" Claire raised an eyebrow, then took his hand. For a moment, they swayed to the scratchy strains of a boom box playing classic rock. Hotel California, no less, lights reflecting off her dog tags like tiny moons. As the music played, the world outside the tent dissolved, leaving them suspended between sand and sky. Afterward, David led her to the edge of the camp where the desert was quiet, save for the soft susurrus of wind. He fumbled in his pocket and produced 2 scraps of aluminum from spent ammunition casings, polished and shaped like delicate hairpins. "I made these from ordnance," he explained. "I thought maybe you could use one." He tucked the first into Claire's hair, just above her ear. It caught the moonlight, glinting as she tilted her head. The second he fastened on her uniform chest, a token of the win they'd fought for together. Claire's eyes glistened. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Then she stepped closer, arms wrapping around his waist. David held her so tightly the lines between soldier and nurse blurred, leaving only 2 people who had found solace in each other amid the chaos. Their wedding was nothing like the grand ceremonies David had once imagined. Instead, in a small chapel in Kuwait City's Allied Forces base, they stood before a chaplain in a sunlit room lined with modest pews. Claire wore a simple white dress borrowed from a field laundry service. David swapped his battle-worn uniform for a freshly pressed one, rank insignia gleaming. A few friends from both the army and the medical unit gathered, their cheers echoing in the chapel's bare walls. When they exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other in sandstorm and sunshine, the entire base sounded with applause.
Outside,
the horizon shimmered with heat mirages, as if the desert itself celebrated the union. But war's aftermath is a labyrinth not easily escaped. After brief leave in the U.S., where their families welcomed them with star-spangled banners and homemade pies, Claire received orders to a humanitarian mission in Somalia. David, meanwhile, faced redeployment to Kosovo. Their newly minted marriage license felt fragile against the demands of duty. The morning Claire left for Charleston, South Carolina, before her flight to Djibouti, David pressed a simple silver bracelet into her hand. It was made from the same polished shell casings as the hairpin. "So we'll always have a piece of this desert," he said, voice thick. She slipped it onto her wrist, fingers lingering on his. "And you have my heart," she whispered. His departure to Fort Bragg 2 weeks later ended in a tearful goodbye beneath the towering pines of North Carolina. Letters flew between them, small aerograms scented with coffee-stained fingers, inked with promises. Claire wrote of refugee camps, heroic rescues, and nights beneath African stars. David described training exercises, award ceremonies, and quiet moments polishing dog tags in his office. They clung to each word like lifelines. But one morning, a month into her assignment, Claire received an official notice. The medevac unit had suffered engine failure en route to a remote village. The aircraft crashed. She was injured, but mostly shaken, one of the worst moments she'd ever survived. In the chaos, letters from David lay buried under supplies, never making it to her. Meanwhile, David's deployment in Kosovo stretched to months. His letters went unanswered, the post office citing missing in mail. Worried, he requested leave to investigate. Every night, he stared at the empty space beside his bed, where Claire's uniform once hung. When the ceasefire in Somalia finally held, Claire returned to the States, fractured by trauma but determined to find David. She scoured every base she could reach, left messages with the Red Cross, and called every number she had for him. David was at Fort Bragg, unaware of Claire's ordeal. On a cold November morning, he stepped into the base barber shop and found her, standing in line for a fresh haircut, looking fragile yet radiant. His heart thundered as though for the first time. "Claire," he breathed. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "David," she cried, rushing across the shop and nearly toppling him into a barber's chair. They clung to each other, tears mingling with the sudsy foam as the barber paused mid-snipping. David's heart, which had thrummed to the cadence of war and loneliness, now pounded to the rhythm of reunion. Afterward, they escaped the shop into the crisp North Carolina air. David bought her a cup of coffee from a street vendor. Claire wrapped her hands around the warm cup like a lifeline. "I thought I'd lost you," David said, voice raw. "I thought I lost you, too," Claire whispered, resting her head on his coat shoulder. From that day on, they refused separation. David requested a stateside posting, and Claire negotiated her humanitarian work around his schedule. They moved into a modest townhouse near the base, walls adorned with photos of their desert wedding, framed sketches of Potomac sunsets, and mementos of their shared past, the hairpin and bracelet from Kuwait, tucked safely into a shadow box on the mantel. Their love, once tested by sandstorms and mortar fire, now faced only the trials of everyday life, sleepless nights with newborns, budget meetings, and the occasional deployment of David's trainees. Yet every challenge reminded them of the bond they'd forged in Gulf War crucibles, a bond tempered by shared danger and unwavering trust. On their 30th anniversary, David surprised Claire with a trip back to Cape Harbor, Maine, the very resort where Michael and Alice once rekindled forbidden flames decades later. There, amidst the rocky cliffs and crashing waves, David produced a new keepsake, a delicate silver locket containing miniature portraits of them in uniform, hairpin and bracelet etched inside. "For our next chapter," he said. Claire opened it, her eyes shining. "I wouldn't want to write it with anyone else." They watched the sunset together, hands clasped, the Atlantic breeze carrying echoes of both their past battles and the unwavering promise in their present hearts. In that moment, they knew their story, born in conflict but defined by love, would endure long after the desert sands had blown away. Ryan Grant stepped off the Greyhound bus onto the bustling streets of Madison just as a crisp September dawn broke over Lake Mendota. At 28, he was leaving behind a decade of military service, 2 tours in Iraq, and a final posting at Fort Bragg to begin a new role as a civilian liaison for the Wisconsin National Guard. His duffel bag, heavy with belongings, swung from his shoulder as he paused to take in the sights, scarlet and white pennants fluttering from lampposts, students cradling steaming cups of coffee, and the stately pillars of Bascom Hall rising high above Library Mall. He inhaled the autumn air, tinged with the promise of fresh starts, and steeled himself for the day ahead. Across town, Chloe Bennett locked her bike outside the Wisconsin Historical Society, her dark hair pulled back neatly into a ponytail. At 26, she was a first-year graduate student in the Library and Archival Studies program, determined to preserve the stories of Wisconsin's veterans, especially those of her grandmother, Claire Bennett, who had served as a flight nurse during the Gulf War. Chloe frequently combed through brittle flight logs, yellowed letters, and faded photographs, piecing together memories that threatened to vanish once her grandmother's generation passed on. Today, however, Chloe felt a restlessness she couldn't explain. She needed fresh leads, an unexpected spark to rekindle her passion for hidden histories. Their paths crossed by fate at the Madison Veterans and Community Heritage Fair, a sprawling event under white tents on Library Mall. Rows of tables showcased local veterans groups, nonprofit organizations, and campus resources. Ryan's booth, draped in camouflage netting and lined with gleaming medals, drew curious visitors seeking information on educational benefits and mental health support. He polished a row of brass ribbon bars with a soft cloth, his eyes scanning the crowd. Chloe lingered by a table labeled Campus Archives and Oral Histories, her notebook already brimming with questions. She glanced at her watch, 8:45 a.m., and realized she had just enough time before her first orientation session to explore. A flutter of anticipation stirred in her chest as she approached Ryan's booth, drawn by both professional duty and inexplicable curiosity. "Good morning," Ryan greeted, standing tall in his smart casual liaison polo embroidered with a National Guard crest. His posture was disciplined yet welcoming, a perfect blend of soldier and civilian. Chloe smiled, smoothing the lapel of her blazer. "I'm looking for sources on Gulf War veterans' personal experiences. My grandmother served in Kuwait as a flight nurse. I thought this fair might have leads." Recognition flickered in Ryan's hazel eyes. He paused, then nodded with a curt smile. "You must be related to Claire Bennett. I'm Ryan Grant, Colonel Grant's son. My father often spoke of her bravery and kindness." Chloe's breath caught.
I'm Chloe Bennett.
"Claire is my grandmother." The realization that the Grants and Bennetts had crossed paths decades earlier sent a thrill through her. They shook hands, the simple act bridging history and the present. At that moment, the bustle of Sheraton-branded tables and student volunteers faded into the background. Around them, a Civil War reenactor offered pamphlets, a group of ROTC cadets practiced marching drills, and families admired restored military vehicles. Yet Chloe and Ryan remained focused on the unexpected bond forming between them. After the fair, Ryan offered to guide Chloe to the campus archives in Memorial Library. They walked together across Library Mall, the late summer sun dappling through the oak leaves overhead. Ryan pointed out landmarks, the old Camp Randall Memorial Arch, the hidden courtyard near Granger Hall, and a row of bungalows housing student organizations, places he'd already come to know as home. Inside Memorial Library, the archive staff greeted Chloe by name, having anticipated her visit. Ryan introduced himself and secured special access to restricted Gulf War collections. The room smelled of aged paper and polished wood, sanctuary for the devoted. Rows of microfilm readers hummed softly. Glass-fronted cases displayed dusty pamphlets and ration pack wrappers. A climate-controlled vault held meticulously labeled boxes of unit diaries. Chloe and Ryan set to work. She guided him to flight logs listing evacuation missions, and he retrieved reports on unit deployments. Together, they discovered marginalia in a dusty ledger, the familiar script of Claire Bennett, noting the names of wounded soldiers and weather conditions. "Look," Chloe breathed, pointing to an entry dated February 15, 1991, her grandmother's 21st birthday, a mission flown under fire to rescue stranded infantrymen. Ryan's eyes glistened at the recognition. He gently traced the ink with a fingertip, honoring both memory and sacrifice. As afternoon light waned, the two lingered among the stacks. Their conversation drifted from archival techniques to personal dreams. Chloe described opening a community oral history center in her grandmother's honor. Ryan admitted his aspiration to run for local office to improve veteran services. He surprised himself by revealing vulnerabilities, restless nights, the echo of combat memories, the fear of losing purpose. Chloe listened with unerring empathy, her gentle questions encouraging his honesty. That weekend, they drove north to the Apostle Islands, rugged cliffs rising from Lake Superior, forests aflame with autumn hues. In a quiet cabin, they shared more than just research goals. Wrapped in wool blankets by a crackling wood stove, they confessed newfound hope in one another's company. Ryan hesitated, then took Chloe's hand. "I never thought I'd connect so deeply with someone who understands," he admitted. Chloe smiled, tears catching in her eyes. "I've been searching for a story that was mine, and suddenly it's you." Back in Madison, their collaboration became public. The university's Dean of Arts and Letters approved their proposal for an exhibit titled Echoes of Service: The Grants and Bennetts in Desert and Home. Over an October weekend, the exhibit panels rose in Memorial Library's Grand Hall, a sweeping narrative woven through photographs, letters, and artifacts. At its center, Chloe and Ryan placed an unsubmitted chapel photograph. David and Claire dancing beneath a desert moon in a makeshift chapel, soldiers paused in reverence. Flanking the image were Claire's original flight logs and David's polished shell-casing hairpin, artifacts Chloe had displayed personally. Opening night drew a diverse crowd: uniformed veterans, teary-eyed family members, curious students, and faculty leaning in to read personal testimonies. As Claire Bennett, now 62, and Colonel David Grant, distinguished by decades of service, entered the hall, the room fell silent. Claire gasped at the photograph, and David's eyes filled with tears recognizing his younger self. Ryan introduced the exhibit, his voice steady with pride. "This gallery honors the sacrifices of my parents and the enduring legacy of those who served. Thanks to Chloe, we've preserved their story for future generations." Applause rose like a wave. Chloe and Ryan shared a look of triumph, their parents' reunion in a photograph, their own collaboration breathing life into history. Claire hugged Chloe fiercely. David embraced his son with palpable relief. Following the exhibit's success, Chloe and Ryan's partnership deepened. They held oral history workshops in dorm lounges, gathering video interviews from student veterans. Ryan spoke candidly of PTSD and reintegration challenges. Chloe guided participants gently through their narratives. The breathing, pounding heart of Madison's student body soon came to respect them as ambassadors between past and present. Late November brought the first snowfall, frosting Memorial Library steps in white. On a Saturday morning, Chloe and Ryan met for coffee on State Street, steam swirling from their mugs. They passed tourists snapping photos of the Capitol Dome and hurried students clutching books. Ryan slipped an envelope across the table. Chloe opened it to find a flyer, an upcoming community grant opportunity for a veteran archive center. "Let's apply together," Ryan urged. She nodded, excitement shimmering in her eyes. As winter deepened, they spent long evenings cataloging oral histories, transcribing hours of interview footage, and planning an online portal for sharing the Bennett Grant archives. Each story they preserved felt like lighting a candle in the dark, an affirmation that memory mattered, that connection endured. By December's end, their relationship transcended professional bounds. On a snowy evening lit by lampposts, Ryan led Chloe along the ice-skated paths of Tenney Park. Flakes drifted in the air, a hush falling over the lakeshore. Under an arch of frosted branches, he stopped, turned to her, and in a voice trembling with hope, said, "Chloe, you've given me a future I never imagined. Will you continue this journey with me, beyond archives and exhibits, into whatever comes next. Chloe's answer came in a single, radiant smile. Yes, she whispered, breath steaming in the cold. Let's write our own chapter together. Hand in hand, they walked across the frozen shoreline, drawing footprints side by side, a new generation forging its own path in Madison, united by heritage and the promise of shared tomorrows. Spring returned to Madison in a riot of green and gold, the azaleas along State Street bursting into bloom as though celebrating the season, and perhaps Ryan and Chloe's upcoming wedding. Exactly 1 year after discovering their parents' shared history, they stood beneath a floral arch on the terrace of Memorial Union, Lake Mendota's waters gleaming behind them. The early evening air was warm, scented with fresh-cut grass and lilac from a neighbor's garden. White folding chairs, draped in soft ivory sashes, looked out at the arch, and rows of lanterns glowed along the promenade's edge. Friends and family murmured in excited anticipation. Among them, Colonel David Grant, silver hair cropped close, uniform jacket pressed and adorned with medals, stood beside his wife, Claire Bennett, whose flight nurse wings gleamed proudly on her lapel. Linda Carter, Michael's ex-wife, now dressed in spring pastels, watched with gentle tears as Emma, her daughter, adjusted her flower girl basket and glanced up at Ryan with an adoring grin. Chloe took a steadying breath at the top of the steps, her gown a simple column of pale blush chiffon, embroidered lace hugging her shoulders. She felt the late-day sun warm her back as she smiled at the faces gathered. Her grandmother had taught her the power of ceremony, and today she stood ready to honor both past and future. Ryan met her at the altar, crisp navy suit contrasting with her softness. He offered his arm, and she took it, the click of her heels on the stone terrace signaling the final step in a journey that had begun in college dorms and desert nights decades earlier. The officiant, a longtime family friend and fellow veteran, spoke of unity forged in adversity. He told the story of two young lovers who first met under mortar fire and later reunited through the chance reunion of their children on a Midwestern campus. He spoke of forgiveness, perseverance, and the unbreakable bonds of family that transcend time and circumstance. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the gathered guests erupted in applause. Ryan and Chloe shared a gentle kiss beneath the arch, the setting sun casting a rosy glow over them. As they turned to face their loved ones, hands still clasped, laughter and tears mingled in the warm spring breeze. A string quartet struck up a lively tune as the new Mr. and Mrs. Grant Bennett led their guests into the outdoor reception. Long banquet tables under a white canopy held centerpieces of wildflowers gathered from local meadows, and place settings featured small framed photos of David and Claire's chapel wedding and Ryan and Chloe's engagement portrait by the lake. A wooden sign read, "From desert sands to Madison shores. Our story continues." At the head table, Linda lifted her glass. To Chloe and Ryan, she toasted, voice thick with emotion. "May your future be as bright as the love that brought us all here." Emma beamed and clapped, while Claire and David exchanged proud, misty-eyed smiles. Dinner unfolded in laughter and heartfelt speeches. Ryan's best friend recounted the day he first introduced Ryan to Chloe at the Veterans Fair, calling them the historical power couple. Chloe's maid of honor, her college roommate, spoke of Chloe's dedication to preserving voices too long forgotten and how Ryan's steadfast support had given her wings to soar. As cake was cut, a two-tiered confection garnished with sugar camellias and desert rose accents, Claire slipped from her chair to embrace Chloe. "I never thought I'd see this day," she whispered. "You have my heart." David joined them, wrapping them both in a family hug that bridged generations. Outside, the twilight deepened and lanterns bloomed like fireflies. Chloe and Ryan shared their first dance to a gentle acoustic version of "Stand By Me," holding each other close as the reflection of the moon shimmered on the lake. Circle of friends and family formed around them, swaying in unison, sealing the moment with warmth and harmony. Later, as sparklers flickered like stars, Ryan led Chloe down the garden path toward a vintage cruiser decorated with ribbons and wildflowers. They climbed in, laughter bubbling as they waved farewell to their loved ones. David and Claire stood side by side, hands entwined, watching their children drive away under a canopy of glowing sparklers. In the quiet that followed the celebration's end, Madison seemed to exhale, the campus lights soft on the water. Ryan and Chloe, wrapped in each other's arms, whispered promises of tomorrow, of a home filled with books and mementos, of visits to the archives and lakeshore strolls, of a life built on honor and love. And in that moment, every twist of fate, from desert sand to collegiate fare, from broken vows to reconciling generations, found its purpose. Under Madison's starry sky, two families stood united, veterans and historians, parents and children, past and future woven together in an unbreakable tapestry of devotion. The story of the Grants and Bennetts had come full circle, and a new chapter, radiant with hope, had just begun. And that brings us to the end of today's story on Truistery Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.